Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan and welcome to Words in Time. Now in today's video we're going to be talking about CALIBAN'S War, the second book in the Expanse series. Now this is a spoiler-free review, so I'm going to not be spoiling any of the plot from the second book, and I'm going to try and keep the setup fairly vague so as not to give anything away from Leviathan Wakes either. So the setup for this book is that we are 18 months in the future from the events in Leviathan Wakes, and we're introduced to a new character named Prax, who is a botanist, and his daughter goes missing, and there's a mystery surrounding that, and he enlists the help of Holden and the crew of the Rossi to help track her down. Now, we are also introduced to two other characters, Bobby and Avasarala, and they are a marine and a politician, and they are pieces in a political and diplomatic game. So the first book was told from two perspectives, the second book is told from four perspectives. So there's a lot going on in CALIBAN'S War. Now, some of the things that I wanted to talk about in regard to the story was this kicks off with a bang. Right at the opening, we have an awesome action scene, and I was just reminded of why I liked Leviathan Wakes so much in the first place. You can see why this was made into a show. The pacing is great. The chapters feel like scenes in a TV show. I imagine probably adaptations I think are harder than people think, but this is probably going to be one of the things that would be easier to adapt to the screen. But something I noticed that about the action, even though I really enjoyed how it was written in CALIBAN'S War, it felt like a lot of the problems that came up were perhaps more easily solved than in the first book. In the first book, there were a couple of moments where I was really on the edge of my seat. You felt like a real sense of dread, terror, something's going to go wrong, how are we going to get out of it? Whereas in this book, a pattern started to emerge where there'd be a problem and then a solution, a problem and then a solution, and it seemed a little too simple that you started to lose that element of fear, that element of surprise, or at least that's how it felt to me. Something that I really liked in this book, I mentioned briefly, was the politics. So you have the different factions, you have the UN, you have Mars, you have the OPA, and Bobby and Avasarala are thrown into that world, and I'll talk a bit more about them as characters later, but all the machinations there, the pieces moving around the board, I thought were quite interesting. I thought that was really well done. Now we do have some villains in this book, and I felt like they were a little bit distant. They were perhaps lacking a bit of personality or motivation for me. For example, I mean, Thanos, right? He's a bad guy. We don't like Thanos, but he has a particular worldview. Okay, so he has a way of looking at things, and that's made quite clear to us in that story. In this book, I think there were explanations for what was going on, why the bad guys were doing the bad things, but I don't know, that was never really crystallized for me, so I would have preferred a little bit more clarity in order to get invested in them and, you know, taking them down. I think that would have made it more rewarding. Lastly, in this book, compared to Leviathan Wakes, we spend a lot more time on ships, which is okay, but something that I really enjoyed in Leviathan Wakes was the world building. I felt like we got a real feel for Seros and Eros when we were in those locations, whereas the ships, they feel a little samey. So that's not necessarily a bad thing or a problem, it's just something that I was missing from the first book. Now, this book relies quite heavily on the characters. There's quite a few, but I'm just going to talk about four. So Holden, I liked him in Leviathan Wakes. I didn't always agree with everything he did. He was a bit frustrating, but I liked him. In CALIBAN'S War, he comes off as a little whiny. There is a certain kind of a character development, an emotional arc that connects with his relationship with Naomi, and I felt like there was a lesson that it was trying to teach as the book was going on. It's like, can't do this, you gotta do this, can't do this, you gotta do this. And then the ending, to me it felt like it went the opposite way from the lesson that he was supposed to learn. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. That just frustrated me. It didn't quite make sense. I felt like we invested a lot of time in something that didn't necessarily pay off. But I'm interested to hear your take on that, because I've heard some pretty mixed things once you've read the book. Now, Prax. He's a new character. I liked Prax. I was rooting for Prax, but I feel like he lacked some personality. He wasn't as interesting to me as Miller, a character that I find really interesting and intriguing. I just kind of wanted a good outcome for him because he seemed like a good guy, and that was about it. Bobby. Bobby was a great character. I really liked her storyline because she was a fish out of water. She's a Marine, she's tough, she's hard, and she's kind of thrown into the political arena, which she's not really used to, but she picks things up pretty quickly. At first, she's kind of a hammer, just swinging at everything. What they're saying, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but she starts to finesse her way through things, and that transition, her involvement in that storyline, I think progressed in a really interesting way. And she develops an interesting relationship with Avasarala. And I liked her as a character because she had this kind of interesting perspective, this interesting worldview, where she looks at everything like a chessboard. And it's not that she is, I don't know, I wouldn't say she necessarily is detached emotionally, but she sort of has to detach herself emotionally in order to most effectively play the game. So it's not as though she doesn't care about people or outcomes, but it seems like the thing she feared the most was being irrelevant. You have to climb the ladder, you have to win games to play on a bigger stage, and so on and so forth. So two very different characters there that come together nicely in an interesting part of the storyline. So ultimately, guys, I think this was paced quite well with some interesting moments, but I didn't feel quite as invested in the story as I did in Leviathan Wakes, and the payoffs weren't quite as high. So I'm going to give CALIBAN'S War a 6.5 out of 10. It's still a good book. I would say on my rating scale, 5 is average. So a lot of the books that I'm reviewing, I'm giving higher than that, and that's just because I'm picking books that sound interesting to me and are generally pretty highly rated and recommended. So still a good book, definitely above average, but based on how much I enjoyed Leviathan Wakes, not quite what I hoped or expected for. But I am continuing the series. I have already bought Abaddon's Gate, and I'll be reading that soon. So let me know your thoughts, guys. Did this live up to Leviathan Wakes? If you've read ahead, where would you rank this in the series? I'm interested to try the next one and see. If I don't like that one as much, I might take a little pause. If I like that one more, then yeah, gonna keep on powering through the Expanse, because there's a rich world, some interesting characters. I think there's a lot of potential here, so I'm excited to see where it goes next. So, as always, I really appreciate you watching, and stay tuned for more sci-fi book reviews coming soon.